The space age was a period of time starting in 1957 and extending into the 1970s. It started on October 4th, 1957, when the Russian satellite Sputnik made its world debut. What followed in the wake of this amazing event changed the world. Russians and Americans alike orbited Earth. Cameras and men were sent to the moon, and society changed drastically in the wake of Sputnik's launch. The space age was one of the most amazing and influential periods of all time. Both America and the Soviet Union were working on reaching outer space during the 1950s. The Americans had multiple military lead projects, mostly led by the Navy. Military programs had a few successes before Eisenhower called for their replacement with a civilian agency, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration was founded in order to keep the United States in the space race. The first major event of the space race was the launch of Sputnik. Sputnik was more than a beeping ball. It was a symbol, telling the US the Soviets had beat them to space. It also established Soviet missile superiority. Intercontinental ballistic missiles were the most feared piece of space race technology. Bombers didn't have to fly risky missions to deploy them anymore. They could strike anytime, anywhere, without notice. And the Soviets could wage war by simply pressing buttons. This frightened both the governments and the people, especially with the Cold War still being active. This newfound fear was unfamiliar to the isolated Americans, who had simply been enjoying life rather than progressing in science. Eisenhower downplayed the launch of Sputnik in public, but in private, he was frantic. 11 days after the launch, Eisenhower called for a meeting. He asked the assembled scientists and inventors whether or not American science was being overtaken by the Soviets. The inventor of the Polaroid camera, Edwin Land, responded that Sputnik presented a challenge. It was decided that the next generation, children of Sputnik, had to be more intelligent, especially in the area of science. Life magazine showed the difference between a Soviet student, Alexei Kustkov, learning all his subject at a higher level than an American student, Stephen Lepikas, in Chicago. Major reform followed, trying to change that American student to be better than the Soviet one. The entire science curriculum of the nation was boosted by close to $1 billion from the National Defense Education Act signed by Eisenhower. New labs, buildings, teachings, and Darwinism took over the country. Colleges made new science buildings, and to this day a substantial amount of colleges have science buildings founded in the late 1950s and early 60s. The Sputnik scare and the educational reform that followed helped set America up for a great future and spot in the record books for achievements in space exploration. The USSR was beating America in the space race by the time JFK was inaugurated into the office. They were the first to send satellites, first to send dogs, and on April 12, 1961, they were the first to send a person, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit. America soon got a man into space on May 5, 1961, when Alan B. Shepard became the first American into space. But the U.S. was still pathetically late. The Soviets gained this lead in post-World War II era because of their preference for missiles, whereas the Americans preferred bombers to deliver ordnance. This prior knowledge and experimentation into the rocket industry gave the Soviets an advantage that the Americans didn't have. Their space programs were all integrated into secretive industrial military bureaucracy, and all these successful launches were announced. The United States took a different approach. All civilian-led space exploration was announced before launch, and only military-led projects were kept secret. In response to the Soviet Union's leading the space race, President John F. Kennedy planned for his nation to take the lead. On May 25, 1961, John F. Kennedy addressed Congress and first challenged the nation to go to the moon.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take. Since early in my term, our efforts in space have been under review. With the advice of the Vice President, who is Chairman of the National Space Council, we have examined where we are strong and where we are not, where we may succeed and where we may not. Now it is time to take longer strides. I therefore ask the Congress above and beyond the increases I had earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
On September 12, 1962, John F. Kennedy repeated the challenge in his speech at Rice Stadium, part of a college in Texas. His almost 18-minute speech kicked off one of the biggest challenges the U.S. had ever faced: to reach the moon before the end of the 1960s. He also said NASA was going to double the number of scientists and engineers in that area, and NASA's budget would be $5.4 billion. Thanks to the new education system, the number of PhDs had quadrupled in recent years, supplying plenty of new engineers to reach the moon. JFK's challenge to go to the moon was not random. After his embarrassment in the Bay of Pigs incident, he needed something to beat the Soviet Union with. And after consulting with LBJ and NASA Administrator James Webb, it was decided that America very well could beat the Soviet Union to the moon. Many years of projects and research done by NASA ensured what he was challenging the nation to do was possible. Project Mercury, at least in its later stages, was designed to ensure the safety of astronauts while they were in space. Following Mercury was Project Gemini, announced on December 7, 1961. Gemini designed space aircraft that could support 2 men and necessary equipment. With the research from the Gemini project, NASA launched Gemini 3 successfully into space with 2 men aboard, and L. Gordon Cooper was the last American to go into space alone. Both of these projects ensured the possibility of the Apollo program, which began with haste and continued even after JFK's assassination on November 22nd. While the Apollo program was being developed, NASA also sent probes to the moon, Mars, and Venus. Mariner 4 got pictures of Mars and gave us new information on Earth's closest neighbor. The Soviet Unions were first to send cameras to the moon, but the US soon sent cameras of their own. NASA sent probes to Venus and discovered its stormy atmosphere. Venus 3 was the first man-made object to touch down on the surface of Venus, a first victory for the US over the Soviets. Throughout the 60s, NASA was carrying out President Kennedy's challenge. Progress was being met throughout the decade. Sadly, the first manned Apollo mission ended in a tragedy when, during a pre-flight test, a fire claimed the lives of 3 American astronauts. This was a huge failure for NASA, especially because, unlike the Soviets, missions were announced prior to launch. Apollo 7 tested the new space module that the program would continue to use for many missions to come. On Christmas Eve in 1968, the Apollo 8 crew took turns reading from the Book of Genesis in the Bible as they orbited the moon. Apollo missions 9 and 10 tested the Apollo spacecraft hardware for the first moon landing that was soon to come. On July 16, 1969, the Apollo 11 command module, Columbia, nicknamed Eagle, left Cape Kennedy atop a Saturn V rocket with its crew Neil Armstrong, Edwin Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. After 4 days traveling to the moon, on July 20th, 1969, Columbia landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon and spoke one of the most historic quotes in American history.
I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Columbia, this is Houston, AOS, over.
Houston, Columbia on the high gate, over.
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. They're setting up the flag now. I guess you're about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene.
That's all right, I don't mind a bit.
The crew collected samples, ran tests, and then returned safely to Earth. This victory over the Soviets was a pivotal point in both the space race and the Cold War, and displayed American superiority in science and engineering. Apollo 11 was followed by missions 12 through 17, all of them landing on the moon, with the exception of Apollo 13, which had a damaged oxygen tank and had to return to Earth after orbiting the moon. No human has returned to the moon since December 14th, 1972. Space was man's final frontier and changed the world forever. Because of man's exploration of outer space, humans have benefited from satellites, aviation safety, and multitudes of knowledge, all with peaceful intention. Sadly, however, in a world where military dominance is key to power, access to space also had some aggressive intentions. Nuclear missiles can now be launched from one continent to another with ease via space. The access to space also affected American espionage activities, with new satellites and spy planes to keep an eye on enemy maritime and ground activities. Whether for good or bad, space plays a role in everyday lives of Americans, and a key role in our history as a superpower. With space came better education, extremely useful satellites, and military power. All these things have changed lives in the past, and will continue to do so for years to come.
I know where you're going. I've been in space 2 times. I've walked on the moon. Before we can let you go into space, you've got to pass a battery of tests. Are you ready? Anti-gravity test. Fitness test. Centrifuge test. Crash landing test. Rocket test. Congratulations, you're cleared for launch. Just remember one thing. I'm the real Buzz. Piece of cake.